All right. Thank you, everyone that's here. Very, very much appreciated. The purpose of this workshop is in response to our last commission meeting where there was questions about TDRs. So we decided this would be a great opportunity to do a workshop and give a full 45 minutes to Claudia to present TDRs, after which we'll have about 15 minutes of questions from the audience. So when you come up to ask your questions, please treat it like a regular meeting and just say your name and your address for the record, and keep it to only questions because we are trying to keep this to 1 hour total. So thank you again. Write down your questions as she's presenting, and then let's wait till the end until Claudia is done. Thank you. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Claudia Hasban. I'm the Development Services Director for the City of Sunny Isles Beach. And thank you for this Friday afternoon. I will try to keep you awake for the next 30 minutes regarding this topic of transferable development rights. So the City of Sunny Isles Beach, the Transfer Development Rights Program, what we usually refer to as TDRs. So that is the term that I'm going to be using back and forth when referring to the program, TDRs. So at the beginning, basically, as you will probably all know already, the city was incorporated in 1997. Back then, there were approximately 15,000 residents. We have approximately 13,000 housing units around the city. The median age back then, it was approximately 50 years. At the beginning, more or less in the year 2000, we had a tax rate of 2.6 mils. And also just a $1.2 billion in property assessed value, okay? And also a good point to bring into this conversation, so I'm gonna, please keep in mind these numbers, because back then we only had a municipal budget of $21 million. So with the city incorporation, there were new opportunities for the city. Of course, the ideals, the goals back then, they were to lower taxes, improved and increased city services, improved and create open space and recreational space for younger and older ones, for the whole community. So basically that was the opportunity of the time. In the image on the screen, what you see is 1987, approximately Collins Avenue and 181 Street. What you see is just a parking lot mainly. That is the main picture, the main image of that picture. And I don't know if you can see in details, but it's a section of Atlantic Boulevard with no sidewalks. So that is what it was back then. To continue, between 1997 and 2002, the city was using Miami-Dade County Comprehensive Plan and the zoning regulations because we didn't have any and we needed time to create our own. So we had to follow what the county had in place. And the picture in the screen right now, it's from 2002. So you can see that oceanfront high-rise development was already allowed. It had already taken place, meaning the county had already in place these regulations, these allowances. But the revenues that we were receiving, they were minor. They were in forms of permits, licenses, and impact fees, but nothing else. So we were kind of letting the development happen because that was part already, but we didn't have a major impact, a revenue impact to the city. So therefore, we had a unique opportunity to improve those aspects from the city. So of course, between 1997, the year 2000, the city was trying to figure it out where these revenues are going to come from for all these goals that we have in mind. Typical revenue for a municipal are property taxes, license and permittings, service taxes, franchise fees, other charges for other services, etc. The city also looked into what is called a CRA, which is a community redevelopment agency. But that is very limiting. What happened is with a CRA, you select an area where you want redevelopment to occur, therefore taxes will increase, but you can only improve that specific area. It is limited. You cannot apply it citywide. So the city deviated from that The tax increment financing was very limited as well. So they look into the old-fashioned redevelopment incentives. And that it will bring the same opportunities to increase open and recreational areas, spaces, and improve city services. So through the comprehensive plan, we implemented what it was known as transfer development rights, which is a growth management tool to do what we were hoping to do. That was the policy direction of the time. So TDRs, as the slides actually said in that, I'm just going to read it because it mentioned TDR programs allow landowners to transfer development rights from properties in low-density areas and sell them to purchasers who want to increase the density of development in areas that local government has selected as higher density. And I'm going to go in detail. I'm going to break it down so we can all understand what that means. The idea wasn't created here in Florida. The idea actually has been for many years, and the first case, it was introduced in 1916 in the city of New York. And I'm going to just talk about briefly, maybe Ed or Valerie wants to give some of the input, but basically the first case that it was brought up to the Supreme Court, it was the case in Penn Central versus the city of New York. You see in the image, actually, this is Penn Central. I don't know if you can recognize that from the image. But that was rendering of the project that Penn Central property owners wanted to introduce at Penn Central Station. Back then, the city of New York had it in place, the New York's Landmarks Preservation Law. And basically, the city said, no, no, you cannot develop that. That is preserved. That is a historic landmark. But you will have the opportunity to take those development rights from that property and use them in another property that you own. Of course, property owners, the Penn Central property owners, they didn't want to do that, so they took the case to the Supreme Court. But Supreme Court upheld the law and upheld the New York Landmarks Preservation Law, and it says, this is not a taken. You still have the right to develop in another property with all the development rights that you have in this area. So that was the base for this program from 1978. So what was the main purpose then and still of TDR programs? The main purpose of TDR program is preserve or create open space, preserve historic landmarks, compensate property owners for restrictions imposed in their properties, encourage development in designated areas, and protect farmlands and environmental sensitive lands. So what we have done here in Florida is the majority of it has been through protect environmental sensitive lands, create open space, and of course, pay for property owners where the rights that had been removed. So in Florida, TDRs that had been established in Chapter 163, Florida statutes, several governments in Florida, they have these programs. What I have learned over the years that we are a very successful program, especially here in South Florida. And the TDR program, basically, it's formed out of sender sites and receiver sites. Okay? The sender side is the one that is taking the development rights away from, and the receiver one is the one that is receiving the development rights. So in the diagram, basically, you have over here a square that is a sender zone, and another one that is a receiving zone. Both of them, they have the same amount of units. Let's say that each square is a unit, so it's 4 in each side. If we took those rights from the sending side, becomes green, become open space, and it's transferred to the receiver side. In this case, it represents 8 development rights that it's receiving. So you're not increasing the net density or intensity, you're just moving it from one part to another one. So in this diagram, I also going to talk and explain the differentiation of density versus intensity, okay? In simple terms, density is the number of the housing units. How many condos, how many houses, how many apartments can be built in an acre of land. That is what it is. It's basically the unit itself. On the other side, intensity is how big it can be, is the area of that unit within an acre of land. And we also use the term floor area ratio interchangeable when we talk to intensity. So whenever we talk to intensity, we're talking about floor area ratio, but it's different than density. So density, imagine the box. Intensity, imagine what is inside the box. So this diagram shows, in these three examples, FAR is the same. It's 1, okay? But in the bottom one, is basically you are covering the entire lot by a house. In the other one, you're showing the same FAR, it's 1, but it's subdivided into 2. You have 2 units, but it's using the same FAR. And the other top image is showing you 4. It is using the same FAR, it's 1, but into 4 stories. So that is the difference between that. I know that we said keep the questions to the end, but I just want to make sure if anybody has any questions about the difference between density and intensity. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Good, good. So moving forward, we know the concept, we know the legal basis for where they came from, and basically the city went to the state, to back then DCA, and it says this is what we want to do over here. We are basically going to designate certain areas as receiver sites, and we can take development rights, sender sites, from any property in the city, but it's not going to be a net increase, it's going to be just a move. That is what we're going to do. So the comprehensive plan designated sender sites and receiver sites. As I mentioned here in the map, you can see the entire city is a sender site, but there are only a few areas where we can receive TDRs. The most important one that we have been using over the years, it has been the oceanfront, which is called the mixed-use resort, zoning district. The town center has been another one. The one in red, which is the mixed use, and the one in blue, which is neighborhood business. So those are the areas that they are receiver sites. So question, in Golden Shores, can I receive TDRs? No. No single family homes are accepted. Can I receive one in Point Sian Island? No, I cannot receive TDRs in Point Sian Island. Can I receive one in Arlen House? No, because Arlen House is not one of the land use designated as a receiver site, okay? But yes, they can receive it. They can send it. You know, they can use it as a sender site. Moving forward, of course, after we adopted and accepted that was our policy framework, we moved forward. We created our land development regulations, which is our implementing tool to move forward with that. So the framework was developed in order to sending site must be converted into a park or open space. That was the main goal. Ownership of the sending site must be transferred to the city. So the city owned every single sender site. We own all the sender sites. Density and intensity on the receiving side can only be increased by a maximum of 30%, okay? So what happened? We have a sender site, we have 10 units, okay? We're gonna put that in a bank. It is a fictitious bank. I don't have to go to TD Bank to go and get it out. It's a fictitious bank. I have 10 units from this property. The commission approved it. We put it in a resolution. We approve it through a resolution. And we kept the density, which is the dwelling units, and we keep the intensity, which is the square footage from that sender site. Then a receiver site comes and it wants to take only 3 because they can receive up to 30%. So we give 3 to that receiver site, equals to dwelling units and square footage. We draw equally dwelling units and square footage, even though some of the big high-rises in the ocean, they haven't used much of the density. They lose the density. We don't develop those units, but they use the square footage. They want to make bigger units. Private sellers, they're also a part of this program, but must be obtained through commission approval before selling TDRs. Private sellers also, they have to have an account and it has to be approved by the city commission. Private seller is required to use those TDR within 5 years, but we created an extension program so they can be extended, paying an annual fee. TDRs applications are approved at the same time as site plan. We want to make sure that we keep a track of it, so whenever they come over here with a site plan, we said, do you want to use TDRs or not? The majority of the time they say yes. From those receiver sites, they want to use TDRs, and we have to check that they are within the framework, they are not utilizing more than the 30%. We have to reduce the amount of units and square footage from the sender sites, from the bank, and then apply it to that site plan project. If the city is the seller of TDRs, how do we come up with the price? We ask for an appraised value of the property. So based on that property value is where determine the pricing for that TDR transaction from the receiver site. Also, during the site plan process, we accept 10% of the deposit of that cost from that sale at site plan, and then the 90% is paid at a building permit process. Moving forward, I know that we talk about the map a little bit, but here in the map, we show also in the screen, every single site that is in yellow, highlighted in yellow, it has been a receiver site. Regalia has received, Armani, Varadero, Porsche, all the ones that they're highlighted with yellow are the ones that have received at some point TDRs. Park Tower, Saint-Tropez 400, Trump's Tower, Ritz-Carlton. On the other hand, the ones that they had been highlighted in green are the ones that they had been sender sites, meaning we took all the development rights from those properties. Heritage, Golden Shores, Corner House, 18590, 215, 185, which where the Trumberry Cell Center used to be. And you see a note over here that it says Navarro under contract, because we don't know yet that property. We'll talk about that property in a little bit. Pelican Community Park, Buen Margolis, Town Center, Puerto Villaggio, Samson Park, Gateway, Bella Vista, Intracoastal Parks, and then at the south, the Sand Center. So all the ones in green are the properties, the sender sites. And the city owns all those properties. Here's a real example that I wanted to bring to your attention, because this is something that it can relate to you. Mansions of Aquilina, it's sitting in a 2.2 acre, but only has 35 dwelling units per acre. That is their density. Their FAR is 4.36. It's a little higher, but it's only 35 dwelling units per acre. It only had 79 units in that tower. It's 46 stories. And in comparison to this one, to Beach Place in Norbay Road, sitting in a 7 acres of land, it has a 43 dwelling units per acre. It's denser than the Mansions of Aquilina. But in terms of FAR, it only has a 1.1 of FAR. So it's spread across the land, but it's denser. They have 308 dwelling units versus the Mansions of Aquilina that have 79 units and a 35 dwelling units per acre. So then you see the difference between whenever people talk about how density is or how less density is, it is not just about the bulk of the building, the bulk of the space that they're using, it's also how many units they are part of that project. How we administer the program, basically annually we bring a resolution to the commission. We present our accounting basically. The first slide, it shows how many properties they have entering into the program, so all those properties, they have their rights severed, they had been removed. So the city has severed 2,370,282 square feet of FAR and 1,187 dwelling units since the creation of TDRs. That is how all of the properties, they had been entering into that program. Up to today, the ones that we have been sold or we have used for other purposes, financing purposes, and the balance that we have today is 525,838 square feet and 275 dwelling units. That is what we have left. It doesn't mean that it can be replenished right now. For example, when eventually we own Navarro, that number could increase because we will put it in the first accounting whenever we are ready to move that property as a sender site. Here also is an accounting of the private banks. We have Desert, Saint-Tropez, La Playa Verdadero, and the company that owns Navarro. So talking about Navarro, I know that we had many questions about Navarro because the last site plan that we had, actually, we were selling the account that they own. So under Resolution 2018-2840, the city entered into a land donation and transfer development rights. Simple term, we use TDRs to finance the purchase of Navarro. We haven't severed, we haven't taken. It is yet to be a sender site Navarro, but we use TDRs as a financing tool. That is basically what we did. I like to say, I like how Valerie put it. Those are the Bitcoins of Sunny Isles Beach. Okay. So basically, that is how we used it. We use it as a financing tool. But eventually, the city and the property owner accepted the terms, and actually we entered into that agreement. The city agreed to sell the TDRs because Navarro said, I don't know how your program works. I want you to sell them. The city is going to be the broker in this case. And we established a cap. We wouldn't be able to sell any TDRs less than $125 for them. At the same time, the agreement, Navarro has a leasing agreement into the property, which the lease was scheduled to expire on December 31st, 2021, with an option to renew. And at this point, Navarro has said that they will use that term, so it's going to be there for another 5 years. The city has until January 1st, 2027 to pay for all the unsold TDRs. And the city will close on the land by December 31st, 2021. However, that lease is still in place, so that's why we have that other agreement in place. The store will remain, as I said. The city is required to sell Navarro TDRs before selling its own TDRs. And as of September 2021, we have sold 24,887 square feet and 11 dwelling units from that account, which equaled $3.1 million. So far, that is what we have paid for that property. Over the years, moving forward, those are the properties they had participated of the TDR program. As of today, just from TDRs, just from transfer of development rights, the city has collected over $83 million. And we have uncollected $26 million. Those are, remember the 10% that they pay deposit and the 90% a building permit? The $26 million are those projects that they haven't come for building permits yet. And the first transaction occurred back in 2004. And this is the first project that it was using city TDRs. It was the Trump Towers. So Trump Towers has 813 dwelling units. The 30% of that actually was acquired through the TDR program. The city accepted back then an appraised value of $103 million. So that resulted in $13.2 million out of TDRs. So for that increase, for that move of rights, the city was able to receive that. And what did the city do with that money? Eventually start creating open space and recreational areas. One of the landmarks, as you know, in the city, Oceanfront Park, Samson Park, over the years, improved it, maintained it on a daily basis with all the services that provide to the community. Another TDR result also is the town center. This was privately owned, and the city says, do you want to exchange it for TDRs? The private owner accepted it, and they created, the city created a park and maintained it to today. We own that property. We own Oceanfront Park, Gateway Park, another one, as you can see, parking lot with shopping center, 1 stories, and it has become a magnificent center, community center, and a park, Gateway Park. Also, other capital improvement projects that they had come from the transfer development rights, emergency pedestrian bridge in Norway Road, beautiful sunsets, the best pictures you can take from there. Intracoastal parks, Pelican Community Park, and many other projects they have come over the years from the transfer development rights. And we continue. Basically, this is a screenshot from our budget book. These are the projected funding for capital improvements, and you can see and highlight the transfer development rights that they will come eventually to finance those projects. So remember the first slide that we talked about it. This is a comparison between the before, the years 2000s approximately, and 20 years later. So approximately 8,000 more residents, they have come in the last 20 years. We have increased 13,000, approximately 20 total housing units from 12, almost 13,000 to 25,000. We have been able to decrease the median age by 1 year, which is not much, but is a move. The tax rate, even though in 2000 we were at 2.6, now in the year 2020 we were at 2.2, today we're at 2.1, but there were another fluctuations in between, but you can see that the trend was a decrease. $1.2 billion of property assessed value. 2020 year, we were at 11.9. So that is almost an 11-fold increase in property values. And the opposite, your municipal budget, it was 21 million. In 2020, it was 102 million. So only a 5-fold increase. So we have increased property values by 10 times, but only maintained the municipal budget at a 5-fold increase. Back then, there were not redevelopment incentives such as TDRs or bonuses. 20 years later, again, $83 million in TDRs. We only had 2.46 acres of open space and recreational back in 2000. And that was counting the beach accesses, which, by the way, they are not part of the TDR program. We don't own the beach accesses, okay? But they were counted towards the open space because we only had 1 park back then. And today we have 21.5 acres of open space and recreational areas. No counted beach access because we don't know those space, okay? So basically that was the goal, that was the idea, that was the policy direction of that time. And I have to say, we have been pretty successful with the project. I have talked to other municipalities and they haven't even been close to increase that amount of time in such a short period of time, which it's incredible. So with that said, I'm going to open it for questions and comments. Thank you. There we go.
Norm Edelcup, former mayor, 244 Atlantic Isles, Sunny Isles Beach, Florida. I'm going to turn around this way rather than facing an empty background. One of the other major benefits that I think you've touched on, but I would really like to push because there's so many people in our city that feel that TDRs were a bad thing. And what I want to bring out at this point is what Claudia's already mentioned. 1,000 dwelling units are in the TDR bank, either sold or available to be sold. Every one of those 1,000 dwelling units could have been built on the west side of the city. And they won't be built on the west side of the city because we have them either in the TDR bank or they have been put on the east side of the city. So one of the promises we made way back when we first formed the city was that we would try to keep the west side of our city lower density and intensity. The TDR program made that possible. In addition to making that possible, it also raised close to $100 million worth of funding. The best example that I always like to use is the first time we ever used TDRs was for Town Center Park. And the developer had come to the city. This goes all the way back to 2002, 2003, when I was not even the mayor yet. And they wanted to build a 30-story building where Town Center Park is today. We convinced the owners of that property to donate that property to the city. In exchange, we gave them the first TDRs we ever did, and we gave them those TDRs into their private banks, and those TDRs were then used basically for the Jade buildings that were built subsequently. But we got a park on the west side of the city with our first TDRs. We made sure that the density that those TDRs would have been used on the west side got put on the east side of the city and kept our promise. And in addition, as we acquired another piece of property, Heritage Park, we bought Heritage Park with our own money, the city's money. We spent $20 million to buy Heritage Park. But when we acquired Heritage Park, we acquired, I think it was 500,000 TDRs, if I remember correctly. That 500,000 TDRs more than paid for the $20 million that we paid for the park and the $20 million that we spent building the park. So basically, we got that park for free. We got the park land, the park development, and all of it was basically paid for by developers who put the density that would have been built on the heritage site. And at that time, there was a developer that wanted to build an assisted living facility on that site. And there were a lot of people here in the city that didn't want that at the same time. But we acquired that piece of property, turned it into our first big major park after the oceanfront. And those two examples, I think, point out the real benefit of why TDRs existed. They more than paid for a lot of our developments of our parks. They paid for basically the money that we gave the school board when it came time to get a county school here. The $14 million came out of our TDR funds at that time. So those two examples, and maybe the school, are a great example of how you can turn TDRs and not only put the density in another part of the city, but raise funds for a new emerging city that didn't have the funding in any other mechanism to get it other than go out and borrow money, which we didn't have to do at that point. So that was the explanation that I wanted to throw in on top of what you did. But thank you for your very concise and very good description of our TDRs program.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing. When Norman mentioned other monies like what paid for Heritage, what he didn't mention is that money came from the bonuses and other funds that before we were a city and before Norman was mayor, there was no, the developers were really, for what they were getting, we weren't getting enough. The rest of it was another, at least I've roughly calculated it. I might be off 10 or 20 million, but it's at least another 100 million in that. And that made the difference. I mean, I've been back 9 years, we haven't borrowed a penny and spent about $100 million. I mean, so that's it. So I agree with Norman 100% on this.
The one question that I do have that I think you maybe needs a little bit further explanation on your part is the Navarro site. The TDRs that have been sold or transferable to the Bentley building as of a couple of weeks ago are still not officially available, and they will not be officially available until the Navarro site becomes a park site. Is that correct?
100%. Basically, the TDRs that we use to assign to Bentley, they were from a private bank account owned by Navarro, but we took those from the Citibank.
Right.
So all the Citibank that it created Navarro Bank, it was basically from other properties. So
Right.
eventually, the rights from Navarro hasn't been severe yet. They haven't been removed yet.
Because
Whenever-
if for the next 5 years, or as long as they keep the
Correct.
lease, those TDRs on that property are not available.
Correct. We don't own the
Right.
property yet. We have a
Right.
contract, an agreement, but yes, 100%.
Final question, does Navarro pay a rent for the extension of the lease?
They pay a rent for the extension of
Yeah,
the
you
lease.
said they increased
They
the,
will.
yeah.
5 years.
Are they
exactly.
paying a rent for that?
Basically, since we don't own it yet, the rent it will be the city once we pay that property in full. So let's say Bentley comes for a building permit next year, we'll pay it 100%, and then the rent it will be assigned to the city.
There is a rental amount, that's what I'm asking.
Correct,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Jeanette Gatto, 230 174th Street, Winston Towers 300. It seems that because of the configuration of our city, we are a perfect example of effectively using TDRs because of the flexibility it offers. Is that true to a degree? Meaning that we are not a large city, and we have to get more creative in ways that we can do the kinds of things the former mayor was talking about. So I think we could probably look at us
Definitely.
as the gold standard of being the most effective use of TDRs.
Definitely, since we're a small city, and I explained before, CRAs are widely used in other cities and municipalities, but we don't have the land. So this is citywide. From any property, you can take the rights and put it in eventually the ocean front, which is going to yield you a greater benefit to the city. So definitely, it's the right tool at the right place. Sure.
Maggie Gordo, Sands Point, Ocean Beach, 16711 Collins Avenue. For all of those that know me, I'm very concerned always about the town center. And I have a question that I haven't been able to get an answer from, even from my best friend Norman. So this is my question. We know that the city has basically accepted the fact that there were more units built on that area of the park towers and all of that. And at that time, we had always also acquired the Gateway Park. So being that we were using the wrong density and intensity, and excuse me if I'm saying something incorrect because I am not as expert as Norman is, my question is, the owner of the Gateway Park, did we give him TDRs based on the wrong property rights that would have been more density and intensity, mainly, is that the right question? I haven't been able to get an answer from Norman.
When we bought the various properties that make up Gateway Park, one of the properties that we bought was Renan Katz's shopping center. When we bought Renan's shopping center, we gave him cash and some TDRs. His property, I believe, would have had 180,000 density, if I remember the number correctly, and we wound up giving him 90,000 plus a cash amount that basically added up to a value of about $11 million. When we acquired the property next to it, which was where the dollhouse was, which was another reason why we created a park, was to get rid of an undesirable piece of property. In that particular case, it was resolved in court as to how much we paid, but we actually paid all cash for that property. Then there was a third piece of property, if I remember correctly, that Milton owned. Right. And in Milton's case, I believe we may have given him TDRs, if I'm not mistaken. So I think but in every case, the TDRs that they got was based on the property that they owned, not on what was being built in the park. So The commercial property had whatever the zoning was at that time. They received the density based on that.
You're correct. Basically, there were three properties.
Right.
Renan Katz, 287 Sunny Isles Boulevard, and Milton property.
Right,
So,
those were the three.
So the
Yeah.
Milton property, exactly what zoning property rights did they have? That's the question.
There was a commercial store on that property
right,
at
the
the
commercial
time.
store. Yeah.
And it was whatever the commercial zoning was, it was converted to
Right.
The
Yeah.
number of density units that that
Right,
property
right.
could have, and that's what he got.
So in that exchange, basically, let me
Yeah,
see,
the
from
numbers.
the bank, it's right here. Milton received 12 dwelling units and 53,000 and some change for that property. He didn't have such a big, compared
It
to
was a very
Renan,
small-
where
It
small.
was a small
base.
parking
Yes,
lot
exactly.
that actually
Yeah.
was the parking lot for the
Yeah.
old Jefferson Bank that was across the street. It helps when you have the memory all the way back to antiquity, where I came from.
Thank you. I think we need to actually do another workshop with a history lesson from Norman. I'd like to give the commission an opportunity if they want to come up and ask any questions or make any comments. Okay, Mike, I hope you enjoy editing this to make it interesting. Thank you very much for your input, for the history, for attending, for the questions, and I hope we can continue doing some of these sort of workshops to help people better understand some of the jargon that we use up on the dais, because it really does help the community to understand, to have a more transparency in what has been happening, and certainly, we would love to have you come to more commission meetings so that you can give this sort of input. Yes, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.